For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started. All right, looks like we are live again. This is the big, much anticipated rematch between Boy and Praise I Am. So round one was intense. So it's tough to say who won that debate, but round two here is sure to be the deciding factor. So guys, thank you for your patience. We're just running it through StreamYard now. And I think with all the snowstorms going on, and I think it's a little rough tonight internet-wise. So we're back, though. Good to see everybody in the chat. My man Created Heterozygosity says audio is good. So so we're good to go then. We're good to go. Once again, guys, we're debating, does the Christian God exist? We've got Boy here. He's been here before. Just last week, debated myself. We've got Praise I Am, who's no stranger to debates, no stranger to this channel. So this is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to keep the opening statements between 10 and 12 minutes, followed by a short rebuttal, an open discussion. Okay, guys, and a short Q&A. So send me your questions, and we'll do as many as we can. I'm going to try and keep this debate about an hour and a half since we started late tonight. So enough for me. We're going to go right into the debate. We're not going to waste any time or play any games. So Praise, we're going into your opening statement. You've got about 10 to 12 minutes. If you need to screen share, I'll do it from my end. And we'll make sure there's no issues. So here we go, guys. Let the
There
party
we
begin.
go. Awesome. So I apologize for the technical difficulties, and I appreciate the patience of my interlocutor, and it should be a good one. So, does the Christian God exist? That is the topic of tonight's debate, and I'm going to present a tripart argument, or three-parted argument for the Christian God. So the first argument is the Christian God objectively. So the Christian God objectively has supererogatory moral goodness. And Richard Swinburne, he's the emeritus professor of philosophy at the University of Oxford. In his first chapter in his book, Responsibility and Atonement, and also William Alston, a PhD philosopher, illustrate moral goodness can only be grounded in the Christian God because only he can be the source of supererogation. Moral goodness is categorized as good acts that either are obligatory, constituting duties, or supererogatory, good acts which go above and beyond duty. So subjects are praiseworthy for doing supererogatory acts, but not obligatory acts. The Christian God objectively personifies supererogatory moral goodness as the following two-premise syllogism lays out. Premise 1, supererogatory actions are necessarily regarded as deeds that go beyond obligation. Only a non-natural explanation can account for moral praiseworthy deeds that go beyond duty, as outlined in Jerome Daniel Schoon's paper, No Moral Progress Without an Objective Moral Ontology, due to the local problem, the problem of speciesism, and the problem of evolutionary ethics. Conclusion 1, a non-natural and supererogatory source of moral goodness exists due to its naturalistic limitations. Premise number 2, no deity or religious book outside of Christianity can represent supererogation due to their obligatory nature. Only the Christian God qualifies as the source of supererogation because only he has accomplished supererogation via the cross for the benefit of all people, even his enemies, without obligation. Jesus Christ's supererogatory sacrificial death pleased the Father. Hence, conclusion number 2, the Christian God is necessarily the objective source of supererogatory goodness. Therefore, the Christian God exists by virtue of its supererogatory, non-obligatory nature and the absence of supererogation in all other holy books and deities. And now we're going to my second part for my arguments for the Christian God, and it's the Christian God is the unconditioned reality. So this argument was first introduced by Thomas Aquinas, which has been revolutionized by modern philosopher Robert Spitzer, which is as follows. There can only be two types of existing realities. A conditioned reality is any reality, human, plant, animal, the universe, etc., that depends on something else for its existence. For example, a cat depends on its organs. The organs depend on its cells. The cells depend on molecules, which depend on atoms, etc. This dependence is simultaneous at any moment the conditioned reality exists. And an unconditioned reality is any reality that is self-sufficient. Example, does not depend on anything else for its existence. This is what is called the Christian God. And here's a little illustration how the cat is dependent on cells, the structure of cells, and the cells are dependent on molecules, and it goes on an infinite chain. And this is where we get into the unconditioned reality. And so here we're going to continue. The argument continued. So any conditioned reality by definition must either depend upon, number 1, a finite number of conditioned realities only, number 2, or an infinite number of conditioned realities only, or 3, or a finite number of conditioned realities plus at least one unconditioned reality. So a conditioned reality cannot be caused by a finite series of conditioned realities. If there's a linear series of conditioned realities, that would be the first. What would be the first one to depend on? Since it must depend on something and there is nothing prior to it, the whole linear chain ceases to exist. Therefore, a linear series of conditioned realities cannot exist. Additionally, a circular finite series of conditioned realities could not exist either. This would simply result in each conditioned reality fulfilling their own conditions, which violates the definition of a conditioned reality. So the conditioned realities cannot exist in an infinite chain either. A very large series of 1 million conditioned realities cannot exist. Neither can a series of 1 billion, and so on and so forth. As the number of conditioned realities in a series increases, the result continues to be non-existent. Continuously adding 1 million, billion, trillion, etc. to the end of the chain would never allow for the conditions of existence to be satisfied. Therefore, the entire infinite chain of conditioned realities would never have its conditions filled. And here's the last part of this argument. The Christian God is the unconditioned reality. So it's an infinite number of conditioned realities. It cannot be dependent on something, so therefore the universe cannot be it, or anything else that we see in reality. So here's the argument. So to argue another way, if an infinite series of conditions realities could exist on its own, then the complete set of infinite conditions of realities would be an unconditioned reality. However, this is impossible because an unconditioned reality cannot depend on an aggregate of conditioned realities such as the universe. If this were the case, it would still be conditioned. Therefore, a set of infinite conditioned realities is itself a conditioned reality and fails to exist on its own. Since any model made up of entirely conditioned realities can never have their conditions fulfilled, it therefore follows that all conditioned realities must be caused by a series of reality that ends or begins in an ontological chain with an unconditioned reality. So here's what we gain out of that in summary. Therefore, an unconditioned reality must exist necessarily. And proof that any unconditioned reality is absolutely simple. So here's what we do. A, anything that is composed of parts is caused and conditioned by those parts. B, therefore, any unconditioned reality is absolute, simple by definition because it cannot be composed of any parts or an aggregate of parts. And this is why the Christian God is the unconditioned reality, because A, all spatio-temporal realities are a composite made of parts like atoms, molecules, spatial coordinates, and temporal coordinates. B, therefore, by definition, the unconditioned reality is beyond matter, space, and time. And then C, not number C, C in this argumentation, therefore the unconditioned reality is absolute, simplicity, transcendent, immaterial, eternal, changeless, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, omnibenevolent, and perfect. Conclusion, the unconditioned reality exists. Who is the Christian God? Because he is absolute simplicity, 2 Corinthians 11:3. He is immaterial, John 4:24. He is transcendent, Ephesians 4:6. He is eternal, Psalms 90 verse 2. He's changeless, Malachi 3:6. He's omnipotent, Revelation 19:6. He's omniscient, Isaiah 46:10. He's omnipresent, Jeremiah 23:24. And he's omnibenevolent, Psalms 136 verse 2. And he is perfect through the words of Jesus himself, Matthew 5:48. And here's a good diagram why the difference of classical theism versus other pantheistic gods and other polytheistic gods. So God is the unconditional reality. Unconditioned reality in the cosmos is conditioned. And there you go. And I think I can add maybe one more argument. And there's mathematical proof of the Christian God as well. So Professor Peter Stoner, the former chairman of mathematics at Pasadena College, calculated the probability of 8 messianic prophecies being self-fulfilled and or being tampered with. Here is just 4 out of 8 prophecies as examples that he used in his book. So I'm just going to use 4 of them. The Bethlehem Ephratah, and what he says in this prophecy is, so the average population of Bethlehem from those days, from the prophet Micah to this present time, and divided by the average population of the earth for the same period of time, it was discovered that this ratio was 1 to 280,000. Since that time, the earth has had an average population of 2 billion. So the answer would be no. that it would be one man in 7,150 out of 2 billion, or one man in 2 times 8 to the 10th power, or times 10 to the 5th power, if he was born in Bethlehem. And that kind of shows, I mean, to me, that's pretty glaring proof that the Christian God exists is by virtue of mathematics alone through probabilities of messianic prophecies. Here's a second one. Behold, I will send my messenger, and he will prepare the way. Malachi 3:1. How many men have been born in Bethlehem and have had a forerunner sent by God to prepare his way? Stoner used a conservative estimate, 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10 to the 3rd power. Here's a third one. And one shall say to him, what are these wounds in thy hands? And then he shall answer, those which I was wounded in the house of my friend. Zechariah 13:6. One man in how many all over the world was betrayed by a friend, and result suffered wounds in his hands. So Stoner calculated the odds to be 1 in 10 to the 3rd power. So here's the last one I used. For dogs have compassed me, the assembly of the wicked have enclosed me. They have pierced my hands and my feet. Psalms 22:16. When David wrote these words, death by crucifixion wasn't even invented. So the question is, one man and how many from the time of King David on has been crucified? This is page 105 of Stoner's book he put out, giving these probabilities. So Stoner estimates this to be 1 in 10,000 or 1 in 10 to the 4th power. So let's run the math. We have 1 in 2.8 times 100,000 times 1,000 times 100 times 1,000 times 1,000 times 100,000 times 1,000 times 10,000. This gives us 1 in 2.8 times 10 to the 28th power. Stoner simplified it by calling 1 times 10 to the 28th power. Written out, it is 1 in 10 gazillion, or how many zillions or whatever, how many zeros that equals. It's like 3, 6, 9, 12. I mean, it's just so many zeros we can't even calculate it. Page 105. What are the odds that any living man from these days, prophecies down to the present time? To get this answer, you divide 10 to the 28th power by the number of people who lived at that time of these prophecies. At that time, this book is published to come up to 88 billion, or 8.8 times 10 to the 10th power. To simplify, you have to round it off to 10 to the 11th power. The odds of any man who lived from these prophecies were made until the present time and fulfilled all prophecies is 1 in 10 to the 17th power. So how can we visualize this with an illustration? Suppose we took an atheistic professor, blindfolded him, and covered the state of Texas with 2 feet deep of silver dollars. Then we put a check on one of those silver dollars and mixed them up. The odds of one person fulfilling just 8 prophecies would be the same as this atheistic professor selecting the silver dollar upon which we have placed in the check in the first try. That's the whole state of Texas. So I think that gives a great visualization of the impossibility of these prophecies being self-fulfilled or being tampered with. And therefore, the Christian God exists necessarily by virtue of math. And with that, I end my time and I give it to the rest of my opponent, and I appreciate your time.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Yes, we're all good. So praise. Let me just end his screen share here. And we're good to go. So, boy, whenever you're ready, take as much time as you need for the opening statement. Then we'll jump into a couple 5-minute rebuttals and then an open dialogue. So, boy, the floor is yours.
Cool. Hi. Cool. So let me just share my screen really quick here. All right. Can you guys see my screen there? Or wait, no, hold on. Your entire screen. Okay. Is it showing up there? Hold on. Does that work?
Yep, you're good to go.
Cool. So we're here today to debate if a Christian God exists. So I'll go ahead and start with The Christian God does not give us a complete model of the universe. In fact, the Christian God does not. Biblical creationists say that we can't know, what God thinks, or can't know how to explain God's power. Excuse me if this citation is wrong. I think I might have just wrote it like unconsciously here. But Corinthians 1 says, "For who knows a person's thought except their own spirit within them? In the same way, no one knows the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God." Romans 11:33 says, "Oh, the depths of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God! How unsearchable are his judgments and unfathomable his ways! For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has become his counselor?" One of the things that we know God did, or the Christian God did, to create the world is some type of transcendence, some type of disconnect between nature, where he was able to just like kind of wave a magic wand and the earth was created. But we were never given any logical explanation of transcendence or how transcendence can work. The intelligent design argument, which I think is one of the best arguments for biblical creationists, says that because this world appears to have been created, then the Christian God exists, which is a God of the gaps fallacy. And there's the cosmological argument that says that a God must exist because of the cause-effect relationship. And this is fallacious as well. So since we don't have a complete model of the universe from Christianity, we'll have to find another model. Ontological mathematics and Euler's formula is a math that has to do with ontology and proves that we are eternal minds that co-create the world. It's all valid by the principle of sufficient reason, which I'll try to get to later. You can think of these eternal minds as like those little, you know how you see those like little, I don't even know what to call those. You touch them and then the like waves like hit your hand. You can think of eternal minds as little containers of all possible frequency information. Visually, it would look like the inverse of this, which I know is like weird to kind of think of, but bear with me here. So we say that these eternal minds go through what's called Fourier transforms, which is where you take a wave and you add different waves onto it to make a complex wave. These complex waves are non-orthogonal and have a projection, which give rise to the space-time domain. So now that we have a clear understanding of the universe and how it can come to be through mathematics, we can think about what are the attributes of this eternal mind. Well, it's eternal, omnipotent, omnipresent, and it unconsciously created the space-time domain through these Fourier transforms. The Christian God has some of the attributes of the collective consciousness, eternal mind, but it also adds some extra ones, which later I'll explain violates Occam's razor, which states that the existence will take the simplest route. I also want to keep in mind that in philosophy, Christianity is a dualism. In the philosophy of mind, mind-body dualism denotes either the view that mental phenomena are non-physical or that the mind and body are distinct and separable. And dual aspect monism, what eternal minds are, supports the PSR, the principle of sufficient reason, and is also the idea that the mental and the physical are two aspects of the same substance. So remember how I was talking about the Fourier series. The Fourier series is what transforms eternal dimensionless mind into the space-time domain. So in that way, it's two sides of the same coin. It is a Fourier transform. So deductively, I can give you two explanations that explain transportation. So I can say a plane's engines are designed to move it forward at high speed. That makes air flow rapidly over the wings, which throw the air down toward the ground, generating an upward force called lift that overcomes the plane's weight and holds it into the sky. The wings force the air downward, and that pushes the plane upward. That would be the deductive explanation for a plane. For a car, it would be specifically an internal combustion engine is a heat engine in that it converts energy from the heat of burning gasoline into mechanical work or torque. That torque is applied to the wheels to make the car move. So we understand that these two explanations of transportation we are different. These two explanations are different, and thus they deduce different conclusions. One deduces a plane and one deduces a car. If I took away the picture and the words, you could still tell me which one it was. I'm sure you could tell me which transportation vehicle it was from the explanation. So if we deductively know this is the equation for existence, then it couldn't be the Christian God, because the deductive explanation reveals that eternal mind is the creator of the earth. Like I said, these two descriptions are different, so these two things are different. These two attributes are different, and one of them gives a clear logical picture of the universe, and one of them doesn't even attempt to. So we know that one of them is true and one of them is fake. So I'll go back to try to tie this into the principle of sufficient reason dictates that no fact could ever be true unless there were sufficient reason why it was. You could think of the principle of sufficient reason as like a TSA agent validating whether a something is a necessary truth or a contingent truth. The PSR in Hyperianism is said to be a super specific way. Christians think of it like this: no fact could ever be true unless there was sufficient reason why it was. And Hyperions take it a step further and say for everything that exists, there exists a sufficient reason for why it is thus and not otherwise. So in conclusion, what I would say is the Christian God's existence is contingent on the PSR validating it. And from what we know from the actual logical understanding of the universe, the Christian God just does not support and validate the PSR. Thus, it does not exist. So, yeah, I think I'll yield my time there.
Okay, guys. Well, that concludes the opening statements. Good opening statements from the both of you. Let's move on into the uninterrupted rebuttal rounds. Praise I Am, you have 5 minutes, and I am going to start the clock on your first word. And I'll give you a 1 minute warning if you need the full 5 minutes. So go ahead. Floor is yours.
Awesome, brother. So, Bully mentioned no transcendence. First, there's no hallmarks of transcendence because we supposedly make up intelligent design arguments. Well, no, I don't think that's substantiated in any way. He needs to show some type of scientific evidence that, well, I'll give an example. Information itself. So information itself is a language. It's defined that way. It has different code, it has different symbols, and it's conveyed. It's expressed. So if anything, we would say the cell in biology represents the language of God because that is immaterial. It has to come from a mind. Intelligence is only produce codes. So I'd like for him to refute the idea that especially complex specified information that's in the cell is merely natural and not contingent on a mind. And then he also said eternal minds, that we are eternal minds. Well, that means that we would have to exist outside of time, so to me it's a self-contradiction. I would like maybe he can unpack a little bit more and elaborate on that, because it seems like a self-contradiction. And where's the evidence that we pre-existed then? Where's the evidence that we existed before space-time and matter was? And he also doesn't understand Occam's razor. Occam's razor doesn't make something true. Just because we may choose the most simplest explanation, that doesn't mean it's the true explanation. So I think that's an irrelevant argument there. And also, the PSR literally is just another way of explaining the unconditioned reality, which was in my presentation, which literally spells out the existence of the Christian God. And he mentioned idealism is a mental substance. Yeah, but that to me is actually evidence of Christianity. Christian idealism has been around for centuries. So that doesn't somehow that doesn't go against our beliefs. So and why is he using it? So if he's going to appeal to a deductive argument, why is he using something circular, begging the question like empiricism? It makes it moot, that argument. And also, he's equivocating the word mind, because God is categorized as an unembodied mind. He says everything in the universe is mind. Well, yeah, God is a mind too. And then I'd like for him to explain, is he a polytheist, or is he believe the universe is a mind in itself? And we would say that is pantheism. I wish he would maybe explain that more in depth. If we maybe in the open discussion, I would like to find more about that. But I just addressed a couple of points there, and I yield my time.
Cool. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, okay, that was about a little bit more than 3 minutes. So, boy, you've got up to 5 minutes. If you don't use all the time, that's fine. We'll jump right into open dialogue and discussion portion. So go ahead. Floor is yours, boy.
Okay, yeah, there's a ton of stuff I guess I have to address, so excuse me if I don't get to all of it. So the first argument that you made was an argument from the branch of philosophy known as moral philosophy, which is just a branch of philosophy that is just begging the question that morality is objective in itself. So I think that that's just a fallacious argument. It also deductively makes an argument for that the Christian God is necessary for moral goodness, but not for existence. And he also begs the question that moral goodness is somehow necessary for existence. So I guess I would just have to try to understand how any of the things that he's claiming aren't begging the question. He said something about conditioned realities versus non-conditioned realities. So you say that the Christian God is the only thing that fulfills that requirement, but my idea of mathematical eternal mind also fills that void, because how we were created is from a result of how we were created is a result from nothing coming from, or something coming from nothing. So it's the ultimate ground of existence, and we say that these eternal minds are the ultimate ground of existence. So it would validate that argument. You also said that you also gave a mathematical proof of the Christian God, which is not mathematical proof at all. You took stories that were in the Bible, which is begging the question that the Bible has something true in it to say, and you used math. You used like numbers from that story to like create a story that somebody could not be that precise or whatever. And even if that story were to be true in some way, it's still possible that, you know, a mortal could get that right just by luck or whatever. So it's not impossible that somebody could do that. So again, that just entirely defeats that argument, I would say. One more thing I would say is that yeah, you said that I would have to substantiate that we exist outside of the space-time domain. So yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to get when I was saying that our philosophy is a dual aspect monism. So we say that mind creates matter, but matter is ultimately reducible to mind. So we say that we exist outside the space-time domain, but the space-time domain is a projection from within. So kind of like when you think of like a dream or you're dreaming or something like that, the thoughts that you're having feel like they have extension, but they're actually just happening inside your brain. So I would say that that's what the real world is, and the space-time domain is the actual domain that the true domain that we're in. Just like a hologram, you could think of like the light source as us outside of the space-time domain, like pure light, nothing can go faster than it. And then you could think of a metal sheet like being put onto the light source as like the Big Bang, or like what ontological mathematics we call it a phase shift. And then the projection is the space-time domain, and you know it arises from the mind domain. So I would say I could get into that more if you'd like, but yeah, I would say that it's definitely impossible that we exist in both domains at the same time. Yeah, I think that's it. He said something about Christian idealism, but it's, yeah, I mean, yes, I did agree. I mean, that is idealism, but it's still a dualism, and we haven't explained how dualism could, you know, there's no model for the universe that incorporates dualism. So.
Okay, perfect. With 20 seconds to spare. So that concludes the rebuttal round. So let's go into a free-flowing dialogue, a discussion on the topic, the points brought up by either Praise I Am or Boy. So since Boy, you just ended with your rebuttal there, why don't we hand it to Praise? Praise, if there's a couple things you wanted to address or a question you'd like to ask Boy.
Yes.
There's the timer. Go ahead, kick us off. The floor is yours.
Awesome. So I want to address, there's so many things to address, but I'd like to, if we could just maybe focus on one at a time. You were mentioning that your position is that we're eternal minds, and we're both outside and inside reality at the same time. But there's a philosophical paradox. There's a dilemma that I don't think you've really addressed, and that's solipsism. So how would you address solipsism, and how would you explain that?
So if I understand correctly, solipsism is just the idea that knowledge is not certain, and any, you know,
not quite. It's
nothing exists outside of like me,
yes,
or whatever.
Right, outside your mind. How do you know that everything's not a figment of your imagination?
Yeah, I would say that that's like an argument that you could make that doesn't lead to the most, like, you could say my math is like something that's like a human construct, but that would not be entertaining, because I could just throw that argument back onto you and say that, oh, how do you know that anything that you're saying is true? So I think if both of us, you know, I think either of us don't want to take that position, and that yeah, like that wouldn't be the most plausible, like, I guess, answer for things. But also I would say that math, you know, if you took away humans from the equation, mathematical equations would still be there and still, you know, be the governing law of the
Right.
of reality.
So let me respond to the first part, and we'll get to the next part. So I disagree, because God created us with autonomy, so we can appeal to something outside of our own minds to corroborate that we exist, and things minds are outside of us. This is where it gets really gray area for me, and you really haven't explained it. Are you a pantheist, or are you a polytheist? What is your official classification? So I think once we get that laid out, maybe this will be a better discussion as well.
Sure. So just to reiterate, you were saying because we can appeal to things outside of like our physical reality, that is like a way we can like check if we're like going crazy or not.
Right, we have a justification for that. I'll put it this way: we have an objective justification to address the hard problem of solipsism.
Yeah, so I guess my rebuttal to that would be that to me that's what the principle of sufficient reason is that's the thing that I appeal to outside of physicalness, that is only in the realm of mind, that I can explore if these ideas are validated or if they exist. So I would say the principle of sufficient reason, specifically the way Hyperions interpret it, is the way to do that. And then what was the you were trying to understand what my
Right.
God is.
What is your official position?
Yeah. So I would say that we are like little. So the way you can imagine it is we're like little containers of nothing that has like, or excuse me, we're like little containers that can that are like equate to zero, that contain all possible frequency informations, like all possible information from existence. It's just the Fourier transforms are the action of these dimensionless beings changing into spatial information. So I would say that there's nothing that stops a multiplicity of those things from happening. That's why when we dream, we can like create a world. So I would say like we're like little gods, but then also there's like the ultimate source, which is the ultimate source of everything. That is its dream is all of us and this space-time domain. So I would say yeah. It'd be interesting. I guess you could define that as pantheism, but
okay, so yeah, to me, I think it more aligns with pantheism. And when we're talking about pantheism, it becomes, I believe, self-refuting, because when we have transcendent epistemology, like the laws of logic, we know that they are spaceless, timeless, immaterial in their nature. And so we know they are mental, and yeah, so they have a mental ontology with it, but we wouldn't say that they're contingent on our minds. So if let's say the laws of logic are not contingent on our minds, I don't see the pantheistic model properly accounting for that. I don't see how. That's why I think your position drops the ball.
So what do you mean by pantheism contingent on our minds? You mean minds as like eternal minds, or like our brains, like?
Right. So what you're saying, a collective consciousness, and it gets, and here's my opening of my presentation, or the second part of my presentation, with the unconditioned reality. And an unconditioned reality is necessarily the case, because it's just an infinite chain of non-existent explanations. Like these, it becomes not. It loses an explanatory scope at that point, because it's an infinite regress. We need something that has credence to it. You know what I'm saying?
So you're saying that it can't be something that goes on for eternity, like, or whatever. There has to be like a ground for it. Is that what you're trying to say?
Right. We want a qualitative explanation, not a quantitative. See, if it's quantitative, it's self-refuting. It'll just still be irrelevant, 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 irrelevant. That's why we need something that's qualitative. You need a qualitative explanation. And pantheism fails to meet that criteria because there needs to be something that is what I would say non-dependent on something else. And I would say your pantheist position is dependent on the universal consciousness. So how would you escape that paradox?
Yeah, so I would say that it doesn't, I guess, because I would say that you might have a misunderstanding. The containers of nothing that I'm talking about, they create the space-time domain from their own nature. They're not like contingent on anything. They have their own. They're I guess the word is they have aseity. That might be the right word, which means like they have their own reason for existing. So I would say it's not like a chain that goes on forever. There's an ultimate ground of existence, which again I would call the source of everything, which it's the ultimate ground of existence. But yeah, we are like little gods, I guess you could say, creating our own worlds before us.
See, here's the problem with that, though. See, this reality is a composite. It's an aggregate of things. That means that it's something conditional on something else and something else, and you need something that is not an aggregate. It has to be absolute simplicity. That is, I went through this in my opening, but it has to be omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, omnibenevolent. Because those are the divine, those are the maximal ontology.
Yeah, I don't get how what I'm saying doesn't
because
that like the eternal minds are eternal. Like when a consciousness, when summed together, is omnipotent and omnipresent.
Because you're appealing to an aggregate. That's my point. You cannot appeal to an aggregate.
How am I appealing to an aggregate? I'm sorry.
Well, the universe is an aggregate composed of many things: atoms, spatial coordinates, and etc. And what I'm asking is, like, see, we can appeal to a perfect unconditional reality, the Christian God, because he's absolute simplicity. So he's not an aggregate. So there's no way to distinguish the difference between an aggregate reality and pantheism. See, pantheism drops the ball there because there's no way to distinguish a difference or give a distinction. So I'm looking for a transcendent a transcendent, non-independent reality we call unconditional reality.
Interesting. I guess could you go into that a little bit more, because like I guess what would you say is the reason for your something to have to be unconditional or whatever?
It has to be
go into that a little more, I guess.
Yeah, sure. I showed my presentation. It must be absolute simplicity. It cannot be an aggregate of parts. It has to be one substance that everything flows from, and it has to be maximal in every possible way. And that's only through what I showed in my presentation, omniscience, omnipresence, omnibenevolence, etc. So this, by definition, that's necessary for this aggregate universe. This universe is an aggregate of parts.
Yeah, you're saying everything has to come from one thing, correct?
Exactly. Yes.
So I think you are mistaken about what I'm trying to explain, because in my worldview, that is, everything does come from one thing. In fact, it's called, the mathematical formula we use is called the source formula. It's like the source of everything. So I think you might be misunderstanding me a little bit here, but so we do say that everything comes from one source, and that is and you could think of the us as like the us as the eternal minds as the result of that source.
So okay, so you're saying you're God, then so the pantheistic God is omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely.
So, but then you would agree that's the same description as the Christian God.
Nope. And this is I guess part where I guess your argument kind of falls a little bit short, because you explain the necessity for this eternal, omnipotent, I guess you gave one more attribute, omnipotent, omnipresent being, but you never gave all of the attributes of a Christian God. He has more attributes than, eternal, omnipotent. He has a personality. He's loving. He has rules for you. None of that is explained in your argument, and none of that is explained in ontological mathematics at all. So I would say you're explaining my God actually in your own argument. You need to somehow explain how these additional attributes, which also violate Occam's razor again, because the existence is going to take the most simplest route. If you're adding attributes onto my already complete equation, that's a violation. It has to be simplistic, as you said. So I guess I would.
Well, yeah, I'm saying that I would say that's a caricature of my position. I think it's the exact opposite, and I'll explain why. So we know nothing comes into existence by its own virtue. So something that is unconditional is required. But here's the thing: it must be willed into existence. So what I'm saying, you're conflating a pantheistic consciousness does not have its own will, and it would not will the universe, an aggregate of parts, into existence. So
could you explain why will is like needed for existence?
Yes.
Like, why can't? Go ahead.
So it's called the unmoved mover. And if you look into the unmoved mover, something has to be willed. It's moved. It's when something's moved into existence, it's willed into existence. And yes, I think that you are lacking, your pantheistic position is severely lacking the unmoved mover. So if you can somehow explain how the unmoved mover is pertinent to your position, then I'm saying no, my position is actually superior to yours.
Yeah, so I would say that so you're saying there needs to be will. So, and I think what are you defining will as? Right?
The cognitive choice to actualize something.
Okay. So you're saying, and why is that? Could you explain why that is needed for existence to, like, why? I really don't get why that would be necessary.
Because there has to be a prime mover for the universe to be in existence, and a pantheistic.
I just explained to you a method in which something unconscious can just create the space-time domain from its own nature. So
no, I would say no. I would say that is a definite. I would say no. That's not true. That's a falsehood. Whoops. The SFT. That's all right. But yeah, I would say that's a falsehood, because we have no evidence of something that's non-mental, and especially if you're an idealist. To me, that is a contradiction on your point anyway. So, I mean, if you're an idealist, you would agree everything's mind. So how can something non-mental be the source of all mentality? And I think that.
So so I would say. Yeah, I would say something that's non-mental can totally be the source of everything. I don't know if you checked out the last debate I was doing with STF, but SFT, but I cited what's called Conway's Game of Life, which just straight up proves how something unconscious can create this, something a logical structure that ends up looking complex over time. It's basically a zero input game. You just set a bunch of rules, which is mathematical mind, and you have motion, and then you see life arise from it. So Conway's Game of Life is like a logical, intuitive way to understand how something non-mental can give rise to the space-time domain, or even give rise to like logic,
So, that's kind of nonsense to me. It's nonsensical for you to be an idealist, which means reality is fundamentally mental, and you're saying something non-mental brought everything mental, a monistic reality. I mean, that
but there's just a complete there's just a little misunderstanding here, because I am an idealist, but when I say that mind creates everything, I don't necessarily mean like a conscious mind or whatever. I mean mental waves. Ontological mathematics is the math of wave particles, which are the fundamental particles of all of existence.
Okay. See, that makes a huge difference. So
yeah, for sure.
Right. So I would say a conscious mind would be necessary for the universe to come into existence, because it requires will. It cannot, and again, I think my unconditioned reality kind of supports that an infinite chain of parts cannot bring something into existence or be the justification of being something unconditional, because it would be unconditional in the first place. So yeah, I think some of these terms are kind of ambiguous. What we use, we have to be careful. I would say, I mean, if you looked into quantum mechanics, you can see mental causation is fundamental. And when we mean by mental causation, we mean agent causation. So would you agree with that, or with the double slit experiment and things like that?
That agent causation is necessary? What would you define that as? Like...
I would say that it is a predetermined choice by the agent itself before the experiment ever be. So this is what they found out, like the delayed double slit experiment, that the choices of the experiment itself was chosen by the agent before the experiment. I mean, before the experiment even began. So it shows that agent causation is free will, if you want to call it free will or free choice. I know free will is a buzzword. We got to be careful with that word too, but it does show that definite a will is important when we come into quantum mechanics. And I know that could be considered woo-woo science, but actually I don't think so. I think we have good evidence out there that that mental causation is fundamental.
Yeah, so I would say, as far as the first thing you said, so again, the conditional argument, the source formula meets that. I think we got over that somehow. I think you brought it back up in a rebuttal or something. But yeah, I would say that what you made a necessity for wasn't a Christian God. You'd still have never, supplemented those attributes into this contingency. But also, I would say that again,
let me respond to that.
Just like I just explained, willpower isn't necessary for existence because of Conway's Game of Life. You can clearly see how structures can, coherent structures can arise from just rules.
So, yeah, I want to respond to the first point. Yes, I did supply evidence for the unconditional reality being the Christian God because Scripture dictates that, and it's revelation straight from the Christian God, and they
That's begging the
support.
question already, though. I'm pretty sure.
No, because no other faith or no other worldview has those attributes. So we can just eliminate 99.9% of them. So we come down to the Judeo-Christian God. So that's what it comes down to, and we can argue, the subtleties, the differences, the nuances between those gods, but ultimately it does boil down to the Christian God or the Judeo-Christian God. Yes, and I do think willpower is needed again because the prime mover must will. It must determine. It's the deterministic will of a conscious choice to bring it in the universe, because then it wouldn't be unconditional. So I would say that you're lacking the unconditional expectations of the unconditional reality.
Well, so to reply to that again, Conway's Game of Life just shows you again how willpower is just not needed for existence. But again, you said something about no other god has the same attributes as the one that you cited. Could you explain what those attributes are again that no other deity has that for this specific argument you're making?
Sure, yes, I would love to do that. So the unconditional reality must have absolute simplicity. It must be so absolute simplicity is required. So that's 2 Corinthians 11:3. It must be immaterial because that means it would be part of the aggregate of parts in the physical universe, John 4:24. It must be transcendent. It can't be part of the infinite chain of these useless conditioned realities. So then we go to it has to be eternal. It can't be conditioned on time. Psalms 92. It has to be changeless. Malachi 3:6. It has to be omnipotent. Revelation 19:6. It must be omniscient. It cannot be flawed in any of these categories to be absolute simplicity. It must be omnipresent. Jeremiah 23:24. It must be omnibenevolent. Psalms 136:2. And it must be perfect in its being, and that is Matthew 5:48. Now, I did a pretty extensive research. No other God has that. These are the necessary attributes that is required for the unconditioned reality. So, yeah, I'm going to give you time to address that.
Yeah, so I would say the unconditioned reality argument you added like omnibenevolent. I don't think that has to do with like your that argument at all. But I would say you also left out a lot of attributes that again make it so the result of your argument is not you're pretty much arguing for my side. But yeah, so some of the attributes that you forgot was again, I guess you can refer back to even my opening. I'll share it one more time. Is My opening is that Christian attributes. Yeah, he loves you, John 4:1, and has a plan and rules for you to follow. Exodus 20. So you got all those, but you forgot some, and I could even argue there's more than that. But yeah. So if you're adding attributes, then it's not the same entity as the one that you're explaining. So I guess you would have to address that.
So I've remember absolute simplicity is the precondition for a unconditioned reality. But we're not these don't preclude other I would say that attributes of God either. God's holy, he's just, righteous. I can find plenty of those, but they probably fall into the categories I mentioned: omnibenevolence, perfection. So those are overarching categories. So if you're arguing over subcategories, I think that's pretty ridiculous. I can find the scriptures that have the subcategories if you're looking for subcategories. But I would like to kind of discuss. You said the messianic prophecies and the probabilities were useless because anyone can make those up. But here's the thing: I'm going to give you a quote. These messianic prophecies surround the crucifixion of Christ. I'm going to give you a quote from a biblical scholar. Here's what he says, quote, "There is a relatively widespread consensus that Jesus was crucified on April." This is, quote, J.D. Dunn, Jesus Remember, Grand Rapids, Erdman's 2003, page 312. So if the consensus is that he was crucified, then obviously it follows that the predictions and prophecies are valid. So I didn't hear any valid refutation of the mathematical probabilities corroborating that the Christian God exists through messianic prophecy.
Yeah, so I would say the first thing that you said, there's consensus that so just to clarify, that you're saying there's consensus on the fact that this thing that you're saying happened in the Bible actually happened, right?
Yes, there's.
Okay.
So when I'm saying there's historical corroboration that these prophecies are valid.
Yeah. Okay. So and you're saying that there's the math shows that there's no probability. I mean, it's near impossible that all these prophecies get fulfilled.
Self-fulfilled or fabricated, correct? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's possible, that, someone might get very, 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 very lucky and, fulfill these prophecies who's not a god.
Correct. Yep. You got it.
So, thus a Christian God, that would be fallacious because it doesn't support the principle of sufficient reason. And, it doesn't.
Well, yeah, no, I'm saying I hear you, but I'm saying the principle of sufficient reason, I mean, perfectly explains the unconditioned reality. I'm saying that's like to a T. It's just rebranded in a different name. So PSR, if anything, is just another version of the unconditioned reality.
Yeah, but we can keep going in this circular argument. Like you can, if you want to keep appealing to that, contingent argument, you still haven't, you still added extra attributes to that, and all of the attributes that you have on there are actually, support my mathematical mind, hypothesis. So,
let me
if you added extra attributes, they're not the same. It's not your Christian God.
Right, but I'm saying, I think you're equivocating the word mind, because a mind has a will, and it has the ability to put, or to will things into existence, and it has willpower. So yet you're saying your pantheistic God is a mind but doesn't have will? That makes absolutely no sense at all. I think that's a conflation of terms.
Yeah, so I would say that again, as we were saying earlier, mind, when I'm saying mind, I'm just referring to, dimensionless, a non-extended, I don't mean brain, or whatever, yeah, that's not necessary. I'm not asserting that a brain is at the center of everything or whatever. But what I will say is that, and it's a little bit hard to get used to at first, is that they're containers of all possible frequency information. So I would say that it supports your argument, but also it shows how these containers of frequency information can arrange themselves in possible ways that create the space-time domain. It's what's called Fourier transforms, which I was trying to explain. And Fourier transforms in mathematics, like we showed in Conway's Game of Life, like you could think of the computer as like the mind, and the Fourier mathematics being the rules, and then you just watch consciousness arise from it. It's something that just generates itself, if that makes sense. It doesn't need to be conscious.
But I'm seeing a mind that has wills necessary to uphold the preconditions for the unconditional reality. So if it's a mind,
what you're trying to say though is that it just something just require, motion is just required, because I think will is not necessarily the contingency in your argument. I think we can reduce will down to something that doesn't necessarily,
well, here's my point. Like, see, something has to be actualized by will to actualize reality. And I'm saying that if there's a mind without a will, then it's lacking, because then it can't actualize anything on its own virtue. Then if it can't actualize anything on its own virtue, then it's part of the infinite chain of what we call quantitative conditional realities rather than qualitative. We need a qualitative explanatory force to do that. And even the Holy Spirit is called a force too. So I'm saying my model is more robust than yours, but I really appreciate the discussion tonight. It was a good discussion. I think you were very respectable, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Usually people get belligerent and stuff, so I mean, that was fun. I enjoyed it.
Oh, I love debate. I'm ready for another one soon. But the last thing I'd say there is that, and this is something maybe we can get into in the next debate. But definitely, and it sucks that we kind of got here at the end. But I would agree. I would agree. Like, I think that what you mean by will is just motion, right? Because like some form of like progression has to happen, right? But I don't think necessarily it has to be cognitive will. I just think progression needs to happen. And in ontological mathematics, we just say that motion is not based on any time. We say that motion is based off of just you can think of motion as just sequential pattern. So these eternal minds, out of the sequential pattern that they exhibit, give rise to what's called non-orthogonal waves, which have a projection, and those waves give rise to the space-time domain. So hopefully we can get into that like more later. But
right. If this could I just ask one last question real quick to you? So you do describe that the your model of reality, which is, you say, mind, but would you say is it intelligible? And if it's not intelligible, then how could your model of reality constitute or fulfill what's required for intelligibility of reality? So there is intelligibility that's required. So there is no rationality. There is no any type of coherency without the preconditions of intelligibility. So do you think your model meets the preconditions of intelligibility?
Yeah, and I would say like two answers to that. Like, one, I would say that like the way we like come to these ideas, the way that we've come to understand ontological mathematics is like through Sorry, could you just read? Sometimes I have ADHD, so sometimes I like read.
No, yeah, that's fine.
Lose sight of what I was saying, but what was the last thing? What was the last?
So, for things to be intelligible, that there needs for rationality, coherency.
Okay.
Right.
So remember what I was saying about Conway's Game of Life? These are just mathematical rules, right? They're not conscious or anything, and you just set the rules, and consciousness and intelligible structures arise from it. After a couple seconds of running this Conway's Game of Life, you definitely don't have anything that looks like a rational structure. But imagine like if you had that Conway's Game of Life on for billions of years, like our world has been around for, then something intelligible would start to arise from these rules, reinforcing themselves and updating.
I see. So you're saying
yeah.
they're like brute facts? Like, did you see the like brute facts?
Yeah,
thing?
yeah. They were like
Yeah.
like our eternal minds are containers of all possible information or whatever. So yeah. Yeah, and
So,
they
yeah.
just express themselves. It's not a conscious thing. It just
I gotcha.
yeah.
Well,
So
let me
in
jump
my
in here real quick, Praise.
Okay.
I'm just going to jump in here real quick. We've got some solid questions from the audience that we can definitely get to in 1 minute. I think it might be a good idea now. We've gone a little bit over the discussion portion, but this has been so engaging, fun, cordial, respectful. Great
Oh yeah, I've
discussion, great
enjoyed it.
debate. Maybe what we can do is have a couple of concluding statements, maybe each take a couple minutes to kind of wrap up your thoughts. Praise, I know there was a couple things Boy may have just said there that you want to respond to, so we can start with you. Couple minutes uninterrupted.
Yeah.
Time for closing thoughts, and then we can hand it over to Boy, and then we'll go over a couple of these questions. And Salvador Cordova, he's having an after show.
Awesome. I love Brother Sal.
For this debate, as well as a couple other shows that happened tonight. It's been a busy night. So after we're done here, everybody head over to Sal's channel where the party begins. So so Praise. Take a couple minutes, uninterrupted time, then we'll do the same for Boy, and then we'll go into some questions. So Praise, take it away.
Awesome. So I really enjoyed the discussion with my interlocutor tonight, Boy. He was respectful. He was engaging. He wasn't belligerent. So hopefully we can have more out there in the future. But to just to re-summarize my points, I believe that his model of reality is lacking, and I kind of touch upon that tonight with intelligibility. So obviously, we can appeal to intelligibility because God is an intelligence. He has will. He's personal. I'm thinking, so I would say that's a more coherent model, and it has explanatory force, brute facts. He admitted his view of reality is based on brute facts. So brute facts don't need any type of explanation. I think that is lacking severely. But I also think that he really didn't address my mathematical arguments that well for the messianic prophecies. He kind of tried to hand wave them away, but I validated through even scholarship, historical scholarship. And I went into supererogatory acts and how it is objective because we can classify these moral acts. And so philosophers have classified, if maybe I would recommend him to check into more of supererogation and how that these I gave 3 problems of evolutionary ethics, the natural problem, etc., the problem of speciesism, why they cannot be natural in any way, supererogatory acts, and the reason why they're objective because they're meritorious. Only God can bring merit. The Christian God can bring merit to them, and that's why they are objective, and they go beyond the duty obligation. See, everything I would say that Boy's worldview is obligative or obligatory, but the Christian worldview, the God that we serve, goes beyond obligation. He does like the cross. There was nothing that obligated him to die for enemies in the world, and we serve an awesome supererogatory God who is perfect by the standards I laid out in the unconditional reality. So I think I gave a pretty robust evidence that the Christian God exists, and I appreciate the time tonight from SFT for hosting this. He did a great job, and also Boy. And with that, I yield my time.
All right, I appreciate it, Praise. Boy, go ahead. As much time as you need, uninterrupted. The floor is yours.
Cool, awesome, yeah, super super fun debate. Like I just had like a blast. So thank you so much. But so yeah, a couple like last rebuttals I would say is that you brought up intelligibility at the end, and I quickly refuted it with Conway's Game of Life and explained to you how intelligibility can arise from mathematical rules. So I mean, I don't, there, yeah, I can just swipe that away. When you conceded that it was possible that somebody who wasn't a god could fulfill the prophecy, because it was just not probable. It wasn't impossible. I defeated your argument there that a god had to exist. When you were talking about an obligation, you're begging the question that your god even exists. And again, the branch of philosophy, is moral philosophy, which is again begging the question that morals are even objective, or goodness is a thing. And then the last thing I'll say is your unconditionality reality argument was just in favor of my model. So yeah, I'll yield my time there. Thank you so much.
No problem. This has been a lot of fun. Great debate. Definitely one to remember. You guys kept this debate extremely easy to moderate because you kept it cordial, equally timed, and respectful. So let's get through some of these relevant questions in the chat. We have a few questions that are directed at both. So this is good. It'll give you both a good opportunity and chance to chime in here. So here's the first question. I'm going to pop it up on screen for you guys to see. Question is from Redefine Living. Thank you for your question, Redefine. He says, standing for truth, question for both. How can you demonstrate that you have not been deceived by God/God according to your worldview? Whoever would like to start, go ahead.
Cool. Yeah, I would say that it goes into like a little bit of what Praise I Am was saying, but yeah, the principle of sufficient reason is a thing that we appeal to outside of our physicalness to recheck if something exists. The PSR states that no fact should be true unless there's a sufficient reason. Hyperionism, we take it a step further and we say that no facts are true unless you can explain, why they're such in no other way. So I think that's the best way to kind of validate if something exists or if you're being deceitful or you're being deceived.
Okay, I appreciate that. Praise, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that we are gifted, endowed by a God that gifted us with a intuition. We have an intuition of common sense, and I don't think any other worldview out there has really addressed things that people take for granted, like common sense, intuition, and I think God instilled that into us, so we know Him, and it even says in the Ecclesiastes that He instilled eternal life into us, so we know that. A great question, though. Brother Sam.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, guys. Good job from the both of you. So this question here comes in from Godzilla Freak. Thanks for the question there. Question for Boy. Do you think there is any distinction between the mental and the abstract? Mental as in mind, and abstract as in forms such as numbers. Go ahead, Boy.
Yeah, I would say that ontological mathematics would be the mental. It would be true because it's like a tautology, which means that it's just different ways of expressing itself. And I would say the way you distinct that from like something arbitrary would be anything like physical, like anything, seconds, the way we calculate seconds is just, some arbitrary, it's not referring to anything constant. So I think that those things, also like maybe like just like, yeah, like speed is like another one. How we calculate that is like arbitrary. So yeah, I would say those are the differences. Like ontological numbers are mental and are true and necessary, and the other ones are just kind of made up. They're like human constructs, I guess you could say.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. Praise, did you have a response at all or anything you wanted
Yeah,
to
I
add to
think.
that?
Yeah, I think Brother Gavin actually said in the chat. So they're prescriptive, and if they're prescribed, then it has to come from a prescriber. But I think they're semantical too. These abstract objects. So I think they fit well into a mental reality or idealism. But I'll just end it there.
I will say, boy, since this is your question, you can have the last word if there's something else you wanted to add there.
Oh, no. I think my explanation was suffice.
Awesome. Awesome. We just want to keep it as fair as possible. So let's see from Bill Morgan. Bill Morgan's kind of a superstar around here. So his question is, Bill, thanks for your question, my good man. So let's see. He says, question for Boy. What do you think will happen to you after you die?
So I would say that like we are eternal beings. Like we just, we're, experiencing a space-time existence at the moment. So I think when you die, you don't actually just die. I think that's like a human understanding of like, the concept of, when you think you've lost your body or something like that. So, I would say that you just get reincarnated. Your mathematical mind is experiencing itself, and then at another point in time, it'll have another phase shift and create another complex wave that has a non-orthogonal phase and put you in a new body, and you'll be good as new, having fun.
Well, I appreciate you answering that question. Praise, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, since we do serve our absolute simplistic God who's perfect in every way, he's just. So obviously that you will have a preliminary judgment that there'll be a separation. Either you're going to be with the Christian God or you're going to be separated from him. And then comes even the worse than that is the judgment after that. So, yep.
All right. Well, I've got a question here for both, unless, Boy, once again, that was your question. So unless you had something else you wanted to add in there, or we can move on to the next one. It's up to you.
No, I guess if I could have like made what I said better, I guess I would have added matter can't be created nor destroyed. So that all supports reincarnation. But yeah, that's about it.
All right. No problem. I appreciate it. All right, so we got a question from Gavin Hurleyman. I appreciate your question there, Gavin. Question is for both. Why are the moral standards of ontological mathematics any different from moral non-cognitivism? Whoever would like to start.
Do you want me to that's a great question. It's a complicated one. So
well,
moral,
yeah. Why don't we start with you, Praise, and if you want, you can elaborate or expand on that. Complicated question coming in from Gavin. Go ahead.
Yeah. So moral non-cognitivism is the position that there are no moral truth or falsities. For example, the Holocaust, if you were a moral non-cognitivist, you would say that it was neither bad or good. It was neither. It is true that it was somehow immoral. I mean, you would say you can't say it's true or false. So you're just left at a neutral position. And it is a paradox for materialists and naturalists, but I don't know if Boy appeals to a moral standard outside of nature. So I'll let him address that now.
Go ahead, Boy.
I guess you hit it right on the head. Yeah, we believe morals are subjective. But we can get into morals later. It gets more complex than that. Like we believe that you can build like a objective morality through like raising people's IQ. So I would love to get into that later, but yeah.
All right, awesome. Well, good job from the both of you. I think we'll end it there. We are at the agreed upon hour and a half mark. And I got to say, the debate flew by, especially considering we, started a little bit late. And no, it went well. I appreciate both of your time today. And also, I thank you for keeping this very easy to moderate. Great questions from the audience. Lots of fun, very lively chat. And we are heading over to Sal's after show. He's provided the link
Sweet.
in the chat. So let's hand it over to the debaters, though, for some final words. If they had some final words, of course. Thanks again, Boy. And thanks again, Praise, for doing this debate. It was a lot of fun. So whoever has any final words before we shut it down, go ahead, gentlemen.
Yeah, I guess, I had a lot of fun. So thank you again. It's really cool that you guys let me be on and express my ideas, as fringe as they may be. So that's really, really cool. You can hit up SFT for my email, and if anybody is willing to debate, I'm here to defend Hyperianism and ontological mathematics, and just have some fun with you and converse.
Awesome. Well, like I said earlier, you know that we love debates and discussions, especially respectful ones. Just because we disagree on things, there's no reason why we can't come together and discuss those issues. It's a lot of fun. So we definitely got some more debates for you in the future, Boy. Praise I am. Some final words before we shut it down.
Yeah, it was an enthralling discussion, Boy. Thank you for being a respectful interlocutor, and I really enjoyed it. But I will say this: I do pray and hope that you will maybe somehow get convinced that Jesus is your savior, because I mean, we don't, every day is not a guarantee. We don't know, we could die the next day, and I do want you hopefully to come to salvation in Christ, and that is my hope and prayer for you and everyone who's watching this stream. Any type of skeptic out there, hopefully these arguments are convincing, because I think they're pretty convincing, but I'll let people decide for themselves. And thanks again, brother SFT, for being a great mod, great show, and I'll leave it there.
Well, I appreciate it. Those are some great final words from the both of you guys. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 3:30 EST with Mr. and Mrs. McQueen. We are going to be discussing creation science for kids. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Everybody, God bless. Hope you had a lot of fun tonight. And SFT is out.
Shalom.